Hello, and we're joined here today for the second of our series of 4 one-to-one interviews for the Offshore Conference by Arno Verbeek, who is Project Director with Codling Wind Park. And I think it's fair to say maybe a bit of a pioneer when it comes to Ireland's offshore wind energy industry, because Arno, you were actually here right at the very beginning, like right back phase one, Arklow Bank, working in that project. And I suppose I kind of have to start out by asking the question, could you have imagined at that time that it would be almost 2 decades later before you were working on at Codling, which might be one of the first new offshore wind farms to be built since Arklow Bank was completed?
Yeah, thanks, Justin. It's great to have the opportunity to be here today. Yes, 15 years is a long time. And a lot of valuable time has actually been lost, in my opinion. But the good news is that things are beginning to change. For example, I represent obviously the Codling Wind Park and the largest of the phase one projects. I'm actually pleased to announce that that the project is well advanced. We're making great progress. And it actually means that we have a real potential of starting construction in just 3 to 4 years' time, providing renewable electricity to over 1 million Irish homes by 2030. So yeah, I'm delighted. I like to be back in Ireland because Ireland is one of the best offshore wind resources in Europe. It's on the verge of a energy revolution. But as always with revolutions, it's a struggle between the future and the past. So there's still much to do and to get right.
And I think touching on that in terms of what we need to do to get right, because since Arklow Bank, you've worked in like a number of different jurisdictions. I know you're working on projects in Britain, in the Netherlands, in Germany. And I suppose we're still an industry very much at the early stages and at the beginnings. Based on your experience working in, I suppose, those more mature markets, what would you be advising we should be doing? What should we be doing to kind of ensure that we emulate the success that we've seen in Britain and Germany and the Netherlands, but also what could we be doing to kind of avoid some of the mistakes that have been made elsewhere?
Yeah, see, being a late mover, which Ireland unfortunately is, it does have a benefit of being able to capture all those lessons learned in other jurisdictions. So there's certainly common themes around these successful jurisdictions, if I can call them that. You have a central department or agency that's in charge of the consenting of offshore wind. Those countries that switched from a developer-led approach to a plan-led approach have become the most successful. Those governments had a clear vision, they published frameworks, roadmaps, energy agreements, and most importantly, stuck to the published regulatory timelines. Those countries have a time-bound determination process, providing certainty for everyone. Another excellent example is the free provision of geoscience and meta-ocean data, contributed to accelerated development timelines and also, importantly, cost reductions. In the end, it was all down to creating a successful partnership between government and industry. You only need to look at our neighbors to the east, the UK, to see the unparalleled success of offshore wind. UK, it's obviously the largest offshore wind market in the world. I understand they are looking to achieve 30 gigawatts installed by 2030. And it has a successful route to market, their contract for difference regime. That provides developers with certainty and delivers cost reductions for the consumers. If I can highlight where it went wrong initially and then went right, in the Netherlands, my home country, there was initially a developer-led approach in the early 2000s. It resulted in more than 100 development applications, but in the end, only 2 offshore wind farms got constructed. When the government switched to a plan-led approach, the installed capacity, which was around 1 gigawatt by 2015, quickly increased to 2.4 gigawatts by 2020, and are now on track to have an installed capacity of 11.5 gigawatts by 2030.
I think that's really interesting, particularly the Dutch example, and in an example of how somebody can be going down the wrong route, realize actually, this isn't working, and kind of change as a result. And I suppose when I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking about some of the challenges we have in Ireland, and you mentioned the deadlines, for example, and we perhaps haven't been as good as we could have been in achieving them. I suppose it does make me wonder, the big deadline and the big target that we have is the programme for government target and that ambition for 5 gigawatts by 2030. So I suppose we're sitting here and we're having this conversation, and it's September 2021, and it's getting closer and closer to that deadline. I mean, based on your experience, those kind of project timelines you were talking about in other countries, the approaches taken there, I suppose to ask you the question that we're all kind of asking ourselves from time to time, honestly, 5 gigawatts off Irish coast by 2030, do you think it's still achievable?
Very good question, Justin. Back in 2020, I said that delivering the 5 gigawatts by 2030 was very ambitious. And now a year on, it's looking extremely challenging. As you know, delivering large offshore infrastructure is highly complex. And the lack that we have, the current lack of legislative and regulatory frameworks increases those challenges even more. But saying that, we are fortunate that we have a number of established phase one projects, which are well advanced and progressing well through the development stages. And I expect Codling Wind Park and the other phase one projects to deliver most of that 5 gigawatts by 2030. And that will then obviously create a launching pad for the development of the following phases and floating wind in Ireland. But let me be absolutely clear here. To deliver 5 gigawatts by 2030, we urgently need more certainty around the permitting process and timelines, the grid connection points, functional specifications, constraint analysis, etc., and also the timing and the terms and conditions of the offshore RES.
Well, I might try and narrow that down a little bit, because that's a fairly broad list of things that we need at the moment. And I suppose to maybe focus on what we need now in the next 12 months or so to give us the best chance of getting as many of those phase one projects over the line. And as you said, they're going to deliver the bulk of the 2030 targets and also build a foundation for the future. If I was to ask you to maybe pick three wishes, 3 things that you could make happen in the next 12 months to enable those projects to get over the line, pick 3. What would they be? What would be the main ones for you and for Codling?
Well, those 3 wishes would be, for me, the enactment, obviously, of a robust and carefully considered MAP bill. The MAP bill is a key piece of legislation and that will underpin all the development of the offshore renewable energy projects in Ireland. And it's important that that bill gets enacted at the earliest opportunity, because at the moment, projects like Codling Wind Park, others, have no certainty when it comes to the final detail of the consenting regime, for instance. So we're very much looking forward to the enactment of this key piece of legislation. Second wish would be actually to see increased resourcing in key government departments and agencies, such as Ambo Planola, but also the to be established MARA. Third wish for me would be urgent solutions to the many grid challenges we and the country are facing.
You mentioned maritime area planning bill. It was actually the first of the 3 that you picked. And I think everybody listening to us and listening to the conversation will agree we need it as quickly as possible. But I think it's also about getting it right. And you mentioned there as well that it needed to be a robust piece of legislation. It needed to give you clarity. Having looked at the bill, what do you think needs to change? What would you like to see improved or amended in the bill that would enable that kind of clarity to be given to projects like Codling?
For me, there are a number of things that are important and need to be taken into account as the bill goes to the houses of the Oireachtas. So, certainty on timelines for implementing the new legislation, clear interim measures for phase one projects, which is absolutely essential. But perhaps most importantly, the most important element that needs to be built into legislation, and at the moment that's quite a big gap in that regard, is the provision of design flexibility and consenting flexibility. And let me expand on that. As I mentioned already, building these large offshore infrastructure projects is complex, and it's far more complex than building onshore wind, for instance. Looking at much longer lead times. So to ensure that those projects are delivered, or so the best projects actually are delivered, they need to be allowed to get consent based on what we call a design envelope. And that is simply because some of the technical aspects of the project not yet fully defined at the time that we go into planning application. we can't be very specific on certain technical aspects at that stage. So prior to construction, then those detailed plans and those details will obviously be available, and they would still be submitted and will be approved by the regulatory authority. Without design flexibility and also consenting flexibility, in my view, this could lead to an additional delay of 2 to 3 years in completion of these projects. That is something that Ireland simply can't afford. We are already on a very, very tight timeline. And to add an additional delay to that of 2 to 3 years it's not acceptable. So for me, the key element is the inclusion and the capturing of design flexibility and consenting flexibility within the map build legislation.
I think that's almost kind of slightly terrifying thought there, that you could go through the entire process, and then because you don't have that design and consent flexibility, you face another 2 or 3 years delay down the line and pushing projects back further. The second point you mentioned I thought was interesting, because we'll come back to grid, but like I often think when I'm talking to people developing wind energy projects, grid and planning are the two ones that people talk about the most. But you talked about resources, and you talked about the need to ensure that the proper resources were there. And I suppose I'm wondering, from your experience in other countries compared to some of the other places you've worked, are our state bodies or state agencies or government departments, are the resources there in bodies like on board Pleanála to actually support the development of all of these projects we're hoping to build in the next 9 or 10 years?
Based on my experience to date, the answer is no, Justin. These departments are extremely busy already with other projects that are not offshore renewables related, and with the vast number of applications in the pipeline, there is going to be an unprecedented amount of extensive and complex work generated by all these applications, and that all needs to be reviewed and completed again under very tight timelines. And it's important that the governments and the agencies are geared up, that they have that they have those resources available, because otherwise, again, those 2030 targets will be at real risk of being missed. People I've dealt with in the departments and the agencies, are excellent people. They're doing great work, and my view is that they already seem to be overloaded with work, and to deal with, again, that complexity that it's coming their way as soon as the map bill is enacted and the MACs are being issued. The resources need to be increased, and that is definitely something you'd see in other countries like the Netherlands, the UK, and Germany as well, where you have like I previously mentioned, these dedicated departments who deal with all the aspects of renewables development. And those departments are quite large. You're not talking about dozens of people. You're talking about 50, 100, 150 staff, and that is not something that we are currently seeing in Ireland. My understanding is that the department and the agencies are aware that more resources are required. That will take time to get those resources in place, and I hope that happens as soon as possible, because there's a real chance that once the MACs are issued to the phase 1 projects, that they will all approach, obviously, the planning authority more or less at the same time. So how are we going to deal with all these applications? Will it be sequential? Will it be in parallel? Obviously, we hope it's in parallel, because, again, we are running out of time fast.
I think that's a good point you make there as well, about the need to, this will take time for them to get up to speed. You can't just go out there and recruit 50 people to work in board Pleanála on planning issues. There's a recruitment process, a training process, a resourcing process. And I think one of the other longer term challenges we face, and I think we might need to finish up on this one, the third wish you identified was the need for a stronger grid. And I suppose I was thinking back to what you said at the beginning of the interview. There's no small offshore wind farm, but Codling is the biggest, and it's the biggest of the East Coast project that will be looking to connect to the middle of the 2020s. So is grids important for everybody, but is it particularly important for you and for the ambition that the Codling project team has?
Oh, certainly. Like, we are facing, the industry is facing many challenges. And obviously one of the biggest one here in Ireland is the electricity transmission grid. Because without major reinforcements, in my view, and others as well, it will not be possible to meet that 5 gigawatt ambition by 2030. EirGrid has even informed the projects that at the moment they can only accommodate 1.5 to 2 gigawatts of offshore wind at present. That is simply not enough. It would be just enough for Codling Wind Park, but I would like to see a real emergence of the industry in Ireland. So I would definitely expect more projects, more phase 1 projects to be successful. And they will obviously be looking for that capacity as well. So what we need to avoid is that we have 3 or 4 projects going to the RES auctions, being successful, looking for grids, and then being told we can only accommodate a certain amount, or you would have to wait a number of years for this capacity to become available. So that introduces a lot of risks, obviously, risk as well, and uncertainty. And that is the last thing the shareholders want. We want as an industry, we want to have the confirmation that the grid will be reinforced in time, the capacity will be available, and that is a big ask at the moment. Add to that the recent government announcement: EirGrid will own and operate the offshore electrical infrastructure, has made it even further complex and added more risk to what already is quite a significant risk for not only for Codling Wind Park, but for the offshore wind industry in Ireland in general.
Thank you very much for your time, Arno. I think we're just about out of time now at this stage, but I think 2 things really jumped out at me from what you were saying today. Certainty. We need to eliminate risk for developers. We need to eliminate risks for projects. And I suppose secondly, urgency. We don't have a lot of time to do that. And we need to be doing that a lot more quickly. I'd just like to thank you for taking the time to join us and for sharing your thoughts and particularly, I think, the experience you've had internationally. And I hope it was informative for those who are watching, as it certainly was for me. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Justin.